I'm Emily. I'm 28. And the night my family decided I was trash, they literally threw my entire life into the garbage. I pulled into the driveway thinking about color palettes for a new client, still wearing my cafe apron, and for a second I wondered why there were phones pointed at the front lawn. Then I saw my stuff. My clothes were spilling out of black trash bags, my sketchbooks were torn open, my old laptop lay on top of everything with rain starting to drip onto the keyboard like someone had spit on it and walked away. My mom was standing there in the middle of it all, holding her phone up, talking to a live stream like she was hosting a show. "You're 28 years old, living in my basement like a parasite. Get out of my house. Today." She didn't even look at me when she said it. She looked at the comments. My brother laughed loud enough for the mic to catch it as he kicked one of my bags so hard it rolled across the grass. My sister spun her phone around, giving her followers a full tour of my life being tossed away piece by piece. Someone across the street actually cheered. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just walked past all of them, picked up what I could save with shaking hands, loaded it into my car, and drove off without saying a word. At that moment, they thought they'd finally gotten rid of the family loser. What they didn't know was that 6 months later, they'd be blowing up my phone with 70 desperate messages begging me to talk to them. If you want to know how the parasite in the basement ended up holding everything they cared about in her hands, keep listening. 6 months before that night on the lawn, my life actually looked pretty normal, at least from the outside. I had my own tiny one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes away, a beat-up silver Honda Accord that rattled when I turned the AC on, and a full-time job as a graphic designer at a mid-sized ad agency in Dallas. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I paid my own rent, my own bills, bought my own groceries, and I was proud of that. Then the economy tanked. Clients started pulling campaigns, budgets vanished, and one Friday afternoon my manager called me into a conference room with that tight, apologetic smile everyone posts about on LinkedIn. "It's the recession," she said, like that was supposed to make it hurt less. 2 weeks later, I was standing in my empty apartment staring at a U-Haul full of boxes, doing the math on my savings and realizing it didn't stretch as far as I'd hoped. Moving back in with my mom was supposed to be temporary, just until I found another decent design job. We agreed I would pay her $350 a month to stay in the basement, plus grab extra shifts at a local cafe while I applied for work. On paper, it sounded reasonable. In real life, it felt like shrinking. My mom, Helen, loved telling people she had taken her grown daughter back in, like she was rescuing a stray. At church, she'd sigh and say, "Emily's back home for a while. Poor thing. The economy really broke her." But when we were alone, the story sounded different. "You're almost 30, she'd mutter loud enough for me to hear as she slammed cabinet doors. "Living downstairs like a teenager who never grew up." My brother Ryan would drop by for dinner, still in his greasy work shirt from the auto shop, clap me on the shoulder and joke, "So, how's the artist in residence doing? Any paying work yet, or just more doodles?" My sister Lisa floated around filming everything on her phone, chirping at her followers about Sunday family dinner and cozy moments, angling the camera so I was always half cut out of frame, like I was just part of the background. The basement wasn't terrible, but it didn't feel like home. I worked on my laptop at a wobbly folding table, updating my portfolio, sending out resumes, squeezing in design gigs that paid insultingly low just to keep my software subscriptions alive. Every time I handed my mom an envelope of cash for the month, she'd flip through it like a landlord checking for counterfeit bills and say something like, "Don't forget, the electricity you use isn't free," as if I'd been showering with the garden hose. Still, I told myself it was temporary. I'd scroll through job listings late at night, imagining the day I'd walk up those basement stairs with a new offer and a move-out date. One morning, that email finally came. A small tech startup in Austin loved my portfolio and wanted to bring me on as a remote freelance designer with the possibility of going full-time. The rate was more than I'd ever made at the cafe, and almost close to what I'd had at the agency. My hands were literally shaking as I read the contract. I went upstairs, heart pounding, and found my mom in the kitchen wiping down the counters. "Mom," I said, trying not to smile too hard, "I think I just landed a really good freelance job. It's steady work, decent pay. This could actually get me back on my feet." She didn't scream, didn't hug me, didn't even ask any questions. She just paused, sponge in midair, and said, "Freelance isn't a real job, Emily. Don't get too excited. People like you need stability." Then she went back to scrubbing like I'd told her the weather. I laughed it off, but something about the way she said, "people like you," lodged in my chest and stayed there. Have you ever told someone your good news and felt, for just a split second, like they were annoyed you might actually do well without them? I tried to ignore that feeling. I signed the contract, circled the start date on my calendar, and told myself that whatever my mom thought didn't matter. I had a plan. I had a way out. What I didn't know was that before I could take that next step, she was already planning a very public performance to make sure everyone believed I was the problem, not her. I didn't stop driving until the houses started to blur into one long smear of Christmas lights and pickup trucks. I ended up in front of Sarah's apartment without really remembering how I got there. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside without asking any questions. My clothes were damp, my laptop looked like it had been in a minor war, and my hands were still shaking from gripping the steering wheel. When I finally managed to say, "My mom threw my stuff in the trash and live-streamed it," Sarah just stared at me for a second, then said, "Sit down, start from the beginning." I handed her my phone and scrolled to the saved video someone had screen recorded and sent me before Lisa took it down. Sarah hit play. There was my mother, framed perfectly in the center, eyes bright with righteous anger, calling me a parasite to a rolling stream of laughing emojis. Ryan kicking my bag. Lisa giggling as she swung her camera around like this was top-tier content. I watched my own face appear on screen, confused, stunned, quiet. A couple of comments slid past at the bottom. "She looks lazy TBH," and "My mom would never put up with that." It felt like being at my own funeral and hearing the eulogy from people who'd never met me. Sarah paused the video and zoomed in on something I'd missed. "Wait, when did she even find out about your new job?" she asked. In the video, my laptop bag was open, papers spilling out, and on top of the pile was a printed copy of the freelance contract I'd left on my desk downstairs. The pages were crumpled, like someone had read them and then shoved them back into the stack. "Lisa was down there this morning," I said slowly, remembering the way she'd accidentally wandered into the basement while I was making coffee. "She asked if she could borrow a ring light. I told her not to touch my stuff." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And you think she listened?" That's when it clicked. My mom hadn't just snapped out of nowhere. She'd seen the rate on my contract, the start date, the words remote, retainer, option to go full-time, everything I'd been praying for. And instead of being relieved, she'd seen it as a threat. To her story, the one where she was the struggling single mom supporting her helpless adult daughter. I leaned back on Sarah's couch, staring at the ceiling. "She needed me to leave as the villain," I said quietly, "not as the daughter who finally got back on her feet." Sarah disappeared into her bedroom and came back holding a faded folder. "Do you remember this?" she asked. "It was from 4 years ago, after my grandfather died. The old investor who used to take me on long drives to look at houses and explain why some neighborhoods were gold mines and others were money pits. He'd left an envelope with my name on it back then, sent through his lawyer. I'd been too grief-stricken and overwhelmed to really process it, My mom had waved it off at the time. Just boring estate stuff. I'll handle it. I never pushed. Now, for the first time, I opened the folder properly. Inside was a copy of his will and a letter from his attorney, Mrs. Thompson, a woman I barely remembered meeting at the funeral. The letter spelled it out in plain English. I was listed as partial owner on 3 assets: 45% of my mom's house, 55% of a rental apartment in Austin, and 30% of Ryan's auto shop. There was even a note in his handwriting at the bottom of the page. Emily understands responsibility. This will help protect her if people ever stop seeing it. My mother had never mentioned any of it. Not once in 4 years. I sat there with the paper trembling in my hands, replaying every time she'd complained about carrying me financially while cashing rent checks from a property I technically owned more than half of. You realize, Sarah said carefully, that if this is real, they've been pocketing your share the entire time. My first instinct was to storm over to my mom's house and shove the will in her face, to drag her onto a live stream of my own and narrate every lie she'd ever told. But as my anger rose, something colder settled in underneath it. My grandfather hadn't left me this just so I could scream and reenact her drama. He'd left it so I'd have leverage, choices, power. So instead of driving back, I looked up the number on the letter and called Mrs. Thompson. Hearing her calm, steady voice on the other end of the line made everything feel suddenly very real. She confirmed the will was valid, filed, and enforceable. She confirmed that the rental income from the Austin apartment had been going into an account with my mother's name on it. She confirmed that any loans taken out against the properties without my consent could be a serious problem for whoever signed them. By the time I hung up, my hands had stopped shaking. I was still hurt, still humiliated. But underneath the hurt, there was something new. Focus. For 6 months in that basement, I'd let them call me a burden while sitting on assets my grandfather had specifically tied to my name. They wanted a powerless parasite they could kick around for sympathy points online. What they actually had was a co-owner who knew exactly where all the bodies were buried on paper. I wasn't going to lose my mind on camera. I wasn't going to give them another performance. I was going to take my new job, quietly rebuild my life, and then use the very system my grandfather trusted to make sure every lie they told about me cost them something real. They thought throwing my things in the trash was the end of my story. They had no idea it was the beginning of theirs. 6 months after that night on the lawn, if you had seen me, you wouldn't have recognized the girl stuffing soggy sketchbooks into her car. I was in a small 3rd-floor apartment in Dallas with peeling white walls and a view of a parking lot, but it was mine. No one stomped over my head. No one yelled about the electric bill. No one called me a parasite. I woke up to sunlight instead of my mom's footsteps, made coffee in a tiny kitchen that I actually paid for, and opened my laptop at a real desk instead of a folding table in a basement. The startup in Austin kept their promise. The freelance contract turned into steady work, and then into retainer projects. It wasn't Silicon Valley money, but it was enough for rent, food, and a little bit of breathing room. I took cafe shifts off my schedule one by one until my last day there, when my manager hugged me and said, "You're leaving us for something better. That's a good thing." It felt strange to hear an adult be proud of me without a "but" attached. In all that time, I didn't block my family. I just didn't answer. My phone would buzz with group chat updates and random texts from my mom about distant cousins and church events, like nothing had happened. She never mentioned the night with the trash bags. She never asked where I was living now. It was like she was trying to rewrite the story by pretending it didn't exist. I let her. I needed the silence more than I needed the apology. While I was rebuilding my portfolio and picking up new clients, Mrs. Thompson was doing something else in the background. She was pulling bank statements, rent records, loan documents. Every few weeks, we'd have a short call. She'd ask me questions. I'd send her screenshots. And then she'd say, "We'll move when you're ready, Emily, not when they are." For the first time in a long time, an older adult wasn't telling me to be grateful or stop making trouble. Washkwehi. She was telling me my anger made sense. One Tuesday afternoon, after I submitted a big batch of designs, she called and said, "I think it's time." I stared at the spreadsheet open on my screen. Years of rental income from the Austin apartment. Loan paperwork with my mother's and Ryan's names, but not mine. A rough estimate of what my share should have been. I swallowed hard. "What happens when we do this?" I asked. "We don't destroy them," she said calmly. "We just stop them from pretending you don't exist. They'll get angry. They'll try to make you feel guilty. That's not your problem." A week later, she sent formal letters to my mother and to the shop address, laying everything out in legal language. My ownership percentages, the debts taken out without my consent, the amount of rental income that should have been shared. A request to negotiate a fair arrangement before things went to court. She copied me on the email and mailed physical copies too, just in case anyone tried to claim they never saw it. For a few days, nothing happened. It was almost boring. I went to the gym, answered client emails, argued with a developer over button placement. Part of me started wondering if my family had just tossed the letters into the same trash can they'd thrown my clothes into. Then, on a quiet afternoon, my phone lit up on my desk so fast it looked like it was glitching. First, the family group chat dinged. Then Ryan. Then Lisa. Then my mom. Then a wave of message previews stacked on top of each other until I had to pick the phone up to even see the screen. In less than an hour, I had over 70 notifications. Ryan, "What the hell is this lawyer crap? Call me now." Lisa, "Can we please talk about this like a family before you blow everything up?" Mom, "Emily, where are you living? Why didn't you come to us first? We need to fix this. Answer me." The group chat was chaos. Screenshots of the letter, all caps accusations, cousins asking what was going on. My Aunt Linda dropped in a single line that said, "Maybe we should have told her about the will when Dad passed," and then immediately left the chat. I stared at my phone and realized something had flipped. 6 months ago, I was the one standing in the driveway with my life in pieces while everyone pointed cameras at me. Now they were the ones spinning, trying to control the narrative, trying to drag me back into the role of the guilty child who needed to make things right. I set the phone down, face down, and let it buzz on the table. I made myself a sandwich. I finished my client notes. I let every call go to voicemail. When I finally listened to one of Ryan's messages, he sounded less angry and more afraid than I'd ever heard him. "Look, Em," he said, voice tight, "Mom's freaking out. The bank is asking questions. Just tell us where you are so we can sit down and figure this out. You don't have to do this." But the thing was, I did. Because for years, they'd been doing things behind my back and calling it family. For once, I was the one who had moved first. And this time, the mess they'd made wasn't going to be cleaned up with a deleted livestream and a fake apology video. The first sign that things were getting ugly wasn't a lawyer email, it was a TikTok. I was lying on my couch after a late night of revisions when Sarah texted me a link and 3 words. "You need this." I clicked, and there was Lisa, perfectly lit in her bedroom, mascara smudged just enough to look vulnerable. The caption said, "When your own family member chooses money over blood," and the sound she used was some trending audio about betrayal. She never said my name, but she didn't have to. She talked about a sibling who was suing our mom over a house she never paid for, and trying to take my brother's business away. Her followers flooded the comments with sympathy, calling this mystery sibling greedy, ungrateful, a gold digger. A few of them figured out my Instagram from old tagged photos and started sending me DMs. "You really taking your mom to court over rent money?" one asked. Another one said, "Get a job instead of chasing inheritance." Darren? It was almost funny, in a sick way, how fast people will pick a side when they only hear one version of a story. I put my phone down, took a few deep breaths, and reminded myself that Mrs. Thompson had told me this might happen. "They're going to frame this as you attacking them," she'd said, "because that's easier than admitting they stole from you." A few days later, it wasn't just DMs. Somebody left a 1-star review on my design portfolio page, calling me unprofessional and emotionally unstable. Another wrote, "Refused to work with family. Imagine what she'd do to clients." I knew exactly where it was coming from. The language sounded way too much like the things my mom used to say under her breath. Then Ryan showed up. I was leaving my building one afternoon with my laptop bag over my shoulder when he stepped away from a truck parked at the curb. He looked tired, eyes bloodshot, holding a crumpled cigarette pack in his hand. "We need to talk," he said, blocking my way. "You can call my lawyer," I answered, keeping my voice as steady as I could. He laughed once, sharp. "Oh, that lady? She's trying to turn you against your own family. This is between us. Just sign a paper saying you don't want the shop in Mom's house, and this all goes away. The bank stops calling. We get back to normal." Normal. As if normal was my clothes in the trash while he laughed for an audience. I shifted my bag on my shoulder, reminding myself that there were cameras in the parking lot. "I'm not signing away what Grandpa left me because you took out loans without me," I said. His jaw tightened. "You think you know how business works because he took you to look at a few houses? You're going to ruin everything he built." I almost laughed at that. "He built it, Ryan," I said. "You and Mom just pretended I wasn't part of it." He stepped a little closer, voice dropping. "If you don't stop this, you're going to regret it. None of us are going to forgive you, ever." For a second, the old version of me, the one from the basement, wanted to apologize, to smooth things over, to try and fix it. Instead, I pulled out my phone, held it up where he could see the recording icon, and said, "You done?" He cursed under his breath, turned away, and got back in his truck. Later that night, I sent the audio to Mrs. Thompson. She replied with one sentence, "Thank you, this helps." While my family pushed their version of the story online, she was quietly building a completely different one on paper. She walked me through what she'd found so far. My mom had used the Austin rental as collateral for a personal line of credit without my signature. Part of that loan had gone into Ryan's shop when business slowed down. The rest had been used to update the house we technically co-owned. There were 4 years of rent checks deposited into my mother's account, 0 of which had ever reached me. "Can they go to jail for this?" I asked, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "We're not talking prison right now," she said. "We're talking consequences. Financial, legal, reputational. And Emily, your grandfather was smarter than they gave him credit for." That was when she told me about the clause they never mentioned. Buried in the will was a condition stating that if any co-owners of the properties tried to conceal the existence of the will or intentionally excluded me from decisions, their percentage of ownership could be reduced by up to 15% per year, at a judge's discretion. It wasn't automatic, but it was a very real threat. "They thought they were hiding you from the paperwork," she said. "All they really did was stack penalties against themselves." Meanwhile, the online harassment didn't stop. Lisa posted another story, this time crying harder, saying, "Sometimes the people you'd give your whole life for are the ones who will sell you out for $1. Her comments were full of people telling her to cut me off forever, to protect her energy. I watched the video twice, not because I felt guilty, but because it was surreal seeing someone weaponize strangers' sympathy like that when I had the actual bank documents in my email. One evening, after a particularly long day of filtering hate DMs into a folder I jokingly labeled evidence, my phone rang again. It was my mom. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to it with my thumb hovering over the delete button. Her voice was shaking. "Emily, what are you doing?" she said. "You're tearing this family apart. Do you think your grandfather would want this? Do you think he'd want us fighting over money?" I looked over at his letter on my desk, the one where he'd written that I understood responsibility. I thought about all the rent checks she'd cashed while telling her friends she was supporting me. For the first time, her guilt trip didn't land. Have you ever realized in one moment that the thing you were always told was your fault never actually belonged to you in the first place? I took a breath and deleted the voicemail without answering. They could flood my inbox, flood my mentions, flood my voicemail. They could call me greedy, selfish, heartless. But every new post, every angry message, every veiled threat was just one more piece in a pattern that my lawyer could point to later. They were trying to keep control the only way they knew how, by shouting louder. I was done shouting. I had something louder than all of them combined. I had the law, and it was only a matter of time before they learned that the hard way. The turning point didn't feel dramatic at first. It was just an email from Mrs. Thompson asking if I could come into her office on a Thursday afternoon. Her building was one of those older brick places downtown, the kind of spot my grandfather would have approved of, solid and unpretentious. I sat across from her at a long wooden desk while she laid out a stack of folders like we were about to play the most high-stakes card game of my life. "I think it's time we put some choices in front of your family," she said. "And we do it on paper, not in comments or live streams." She walked me through what she'd prepared, a detailed summary of my ownership in the house, the Austin rental, and Ryan's shop. 4 years of rent income that had never been shared, the loan documents where my name should have appeared and didn't. Then she showed me the proposal letter. It was simple, almost polite. We weren't threatening to throw anybody out on the street. We were just saying, these are the facts. Here's what's fair. "So, what are we asking for?" I said, my eyes scanning the pages. "3 options," she answered. "They can sell the properties and divide the money according to the percentages your grandfather left. They can buy out your share at market value. Or they can keep everything the way it is structurally, but a professional management company handles the rental, and you receive your share going forward plus a reimbursement of $18,000 for past income paid over time." It sounded huge and small at the same time. Not a lottery win, not a revenge fantasy where they were left in the dust, but enough to make things right, enough to make hiding the will sting. "And the will clause?" I asked. She nodded. "They've already concealed your ownership for years. If they refuse to cooperate and we go to court, we can ask the judge to reduce their shares because of that, up to 15% per year. They keep pushing. They risk losing even more." We sent the proposal. This time, the silence didn't last long. Within a week, their lawyer had reached out, an older man who sounded tired before we'd even begun. We scheduled a mediation meeting. Walking into that conference room felt like walking back into my childhood kitchen but with fluorescent lighting and a pot of stale coffee in the corner. My mom sat on one side of the table, hands clenched around a tissue, dressed like she was going to church. Ryan slumped in his chair, jaw tight, eyes darting anywhere but at me. Lisa wore camera-ready makeup and kept glancing at her phone like she was late for a live stream. I sat beside Mrs. Thompson, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth, but my face stayed calm. I wasn't the basement girl anymore. "We don't want to drag this through court," the other lawyer started. "This is a family matter." Mrs. Thompson didn't even blink. It became a public matter when my client was thrown out on her front lawn on camera," she said, her voice even. "We are here because that video is not the only thing your clients chose to hide." My mom launched into a speech about sacrifice, about raising 3 kids alone, about helping Emily when she had nowhere to go. She insisted that the rent money had gone to household expenses and that the loan against the rental was just a temporary measure to keep the family afloat. Ryan said the shop would have gone under without that money, that my grandfather would have wanted him to have a chance. Lisa cried about stress, about brand deals, about how online hate goes both ways. They all agreed on one thing. I was overreacting. I listened. I let them talk themselves in circles. Then, Mrs. Thompson slid the will across the table, tapped the clause about concealed ownership, and calmly explained what 4 years of that would look like in front of a judge. For the first time, they went quiet. The other lawyer cleared his throat. "What exactly would your client accept?" he asked, gesturing toward me. I felt every eye in the room hit my face at once. My mom's eyes were pleading now. Ryan's were angry. Lisa's were calculating. I took a breath. "I'm not here to ruin anybody's life," I said. "I'm here so you stop pretending mine doesn't matter. I want what's in the proposal. 18,000 paid back over time. A management company handling the rental so I don't have to trust you. My name officially attached to every property the way Grandpa intended. And a public apology." My mom flinched. "We'll apologize privately," she said quickly. "Family to family. There's no need to humiliate us in front of everyone." I thought about the video of my things in the trash, the neighbors watching, the comments calling me lazy, the TikToks painting me as greedy. "You already did that part," I said. "You just did it to me." The negotiation dragged on for hours. They tried to push the number down, tried to take out the apology, tried to keep control of the rental. Every time they pushed, Mrs. Thompson calmly reminded them what court would look like, how a judge might view 4 years of hidden income, how that 15% penalty could erase more of their ownership than this agreement ever would. At one point, Ryan snapped, "You're choosing money over your own mother." I looked him in the eye and said, "No, I'm choosing not to let my mother steal from me and then call it love." In the end, exhaustion and fear did what morality never had. They signed. The agreement said they'd pay me back the 18,000 in installments, plus my rightful share of future rental income, and that a third-party company would take over managing the Austin apartment. It also said, in plain writing, that they would make a public statement acknowledging they had withheld information about the will and that the things they'd said about me living off them were not accurate. They hated that last part. You could see it in every tight muscle of my mom's jaw. But they wrote it anyway. A week later, Ryan called to tell me the bank had officially frozen the line of credit tied to the rental. His voice was brittle. Without that cushion, the shop couldn't cover its debts. He shut the doors 2 months after that. Lisa posted a tearful update video about needing a break from social media because of family issues. Her follower count dipped hard when people started asking pointed questions in the comments about the eviction livestream and the truth behind it. A small clothing brand quietly cut ties with her after someone emailed them a compilation of her posts about me. My mom sold her car to make the first payment on the 18,000. The same woman who used to brag in church about carrying me was suddenly catching rides from neighbors who had seen the apology she posted online. I didn't dance on their ruins. I didn't send them smug texts. I watched it all from a distance, in screenshots and secondhand reports, sitting at my own kitchen table, working on projects they didn't know about and paying bills they no longer controlled. They had wanted the internet to see me as dead weight. Now the internet had seen something else. A mother who humiliated her daughter on camera and then got caught hiding an inheritance she wasn't entitled to keep. Was it messy? Absolutely. Did it fix everything? No. But for the first time, the consequences of their choices landed on their shoulders instead of mine. And in a strange, quiet way, that was the most satisfying part. Not the money, not even the signatures on the agreement. The simple fact that they couldn't rewrite reality anymore, no matter how many times they hit go live. These days, my life looks boring from the outside, and honestly, that's exactly how I like it. I wake up in a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Dallas that smells like coffee and printer ink instead of damp basement carpet. There's a small desk by the window where my laptop waits, a corkboard covered in client notes and color swatches, and a plant I haven't managed to kill yet. I pay every bill here with money I earned myself, with work that has my name on it and nobody else's fingerprints. Some mornings, on my way to make coffee, I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and almost don't recognize the woman staring back. She doesn't flinch at the sound of her phone buzzing. She doesn't brace for a voice yelling her name from upstairs. She just lives. The fallout with my family didn't magically fix who they are. Ryan texted me a month after the shop closed, a long message about starting over and asking if I had any advice on budgeting and marketing. Old me would have dropped everything to help. This version of me replied with 3 short, practical lines and didn't apologize when I didn't answer his follow-up right away. Lisa tried to DM me from a backup account, saying she missed me and that the internet doesn't understand the whole story. I left the message on read and went back to my project. I don't hate her. I just don't trust her with access to my life anymore. My mom sent a handwritten letter, pages of tight, neat script, explaining how stressed she'd been, how scared she was of losing the house, how she'd made mistakes and was only trying to survive. She wrote that she hoped I could forgive her someday, that I'd come home for Thanksgiving once things calmed down. I folded the letter, put it in a box with my grandfather's will and the old photos he left me, and decided that forgiveness didn't have to look like going back to the version of family that broke me. One night, after finishing a big design project, I found an old voicemail from my grandfather still saved in my phone from years ago. I hit play without thinking. His voice came through, warm and steady. Hey kiddo, just wanted to say I'm proud of you. I know things feel heavy sometimes, but you see details other people pretend aren't there. That's going to protect you one day. I sat on the floor of my living room and laughed once, a little choked. He had no idea how right he was. For a long time, I thought revenge meant making them feel as small as they made me feel. Standing there watching my things in the trash, I fantasized about some big dramatic clapback, about humiliating them the way they humiliated me. In the end, revenge looked different. It looked like using the truth instead of screaming. It looked like boundaries instead of begging. It looked like making sure their lies cost them money, reputation, and comfort, while I built something quieter but stronger. I won't pretend it didn't feel satisfying to see the apology post my mom wrote, to hear that Lisa lost brand deals, to know Ryan couldn't keep playing boss with money that was never really his. But the part that stays with me isn't their punishment. It's the way my chest doesn't tighten anymore when I hear the word family. I've learned that blood doesn't give anyone the right to steal from you, to rewrite your story, or to turn your pain into content. Respect does. Accountability does. Love does. If you've ever been the problem child just because you refuse to stay quiet, I hope my story reminds you that you're allowed to protect yourself, even from the people who raised you. And if your own family ever made you feel like dead weight, maybe one day you'll get to stand in a place that's yours, paid for with your own work, and realize they were wrong about you the entire time. When that day comes, I hope you remember to choose your future over their version of your past.